Welcome to my channel, Nancy's Tales. I'm all about sharing folk stories, thrilling mysteries, and a bunch of other cool topics. So come on in and join me for today's story. 6 months ago, a rare plague swept through a quiet little mountain town in the American Rockies. This peaceful place, usually filled with the sounds of roosters crowing and dogs barking at dawn, smoke curling lazily from chimneys, turned into a ghost town overnight. Bodies were everywhere. The stillness was eerie, almost suffocating. Then, out of nowhere, a heart-wrenching sob broke the silence. It came from a run-down shack right in the middle of town. Inside, a voice cried out, "Mom, you can't die." A skinny guy named Luke Lang knelt by a bed, pleading with a frail, yellow-skinned woman. "Luke, while you're still free of this plague, you've got to get out of here," she rasped, her voice weak but urgent. Before she could finish, a brutal cough ripped through her, like she was trying to hack up her lungs. Luke wiped tears from his face. "Mom, I'm not going anywhere. I'll stay right here. If you die, I'll die with you. Down in the afterlife, I'll still be your son." "Kid, don't talk nonsense," she said, her breathing shallow. "I'm not gonna make it. But before I go, I've got something to tell you. Go grab that package from my suitcase." She lifted a shaky hand and pointed to a beat-up wooden box in the corner. Luke's heart sank deeper with every word. He stood, walked over, and pulled out a worn parcel from the suitcase. "Open it," his mother ordered. He'd always known this package was hidden at the bottom of that box. His parents treated it like some sacred treasure, but they'd never let him see what was inside. What could it be? With a mix of curiosity and dread, Luke unwrapped it. Inside was a jade pendant, smooth, intricate, and way too valuable for a poor family like theirs. "What the heck? How'd we end up with something like this?" he muttered, staring at it in disbelief. Seeing him frozen, his mom spoke up. "Take that pendant, Luke. It's yours." "Mom, where'd this come from? How's it ours?" he asked, totally confused. "Listen, kid," she said, her voice fading. "I'm not making it through tonight. While I've still got a breath left, I owe you the truth. You're not really mine." Her words hit him like a lightning bolt. Luke's world spun. "No way. Mom, why would you say that? Did I do something wrong?" He dropped to his knees, sobbing. "You silly boy, what are you talking about?" she said softly. "Your dad and I couldn't have kids after we got married. We were tearing our hair out over it. Then, 18 summers ago, this rough-looking guy shows up out of the blue. He hands you over to me, says to raise you, and before I can even ask who he is, he's gone. Just like that. Your dad and I took you in as our own. That pendant? It was hanging around your neck when he gave you to us." She took a shaky breath and kept going. "We were scared you'd find out you weren't ours and hate us for it, so we kept it quiet. You don't blame me, do you?" Luke was bawling so hard he couldn't even speak. "I don't believe it. In my heart, you and Dad are my real family, the only ones I've got." "Son," she said, "take that pendant and go find your birth parents. Do it for me." Another coughing fit hit her, worse than before. Luke rushed to her side, patting her back. The second his hand touched her, the coughing stopped, but then a gush of black blood sprayed from her mouth. Her head slumped forward. "Mom!" Luke screamed, watching her body go limp. After a flood of tears, he grabbed a tattered blanket, wrapped her up, and carried her out to bury her next to his dad. That night, he didn't go home. He knelt by their graves till dawn. With the plague raging and war breaking out nearby, staying here was a death sentence. Better to hit the road and take a chance on finding a way to survive. As for tracking down his real parents, in a world this big and chaotic, it'd be like finding a needle in a haystack. He'd just have to let fate decide. After some hard thinking, Luke made up his mind. At first light, he left his hometown behind, setting off into the unknown. 6 months later, Luke Lang found himself in a bustling little town called Cedar Hollow, a county seat somewhere in the Midwest. Judging by the lively streets and fancy storefronts, this place was doing all right for itself. After everything he'd been through, Luke figured he could make a fresh start here. Thing is, all he knew was chopping wood and growing crops, skills that didn't exactly translate to a factory job in a coal dust-covered town like this. So he ended up doing what he could to survive, begging. Day after day, He'd grab a cracked bowl and shuffle over to a spot outside the biggest joint in town, a swanky diner called Smiley's Grill. Rich kids and big shots loved the place, always rolling in to eat, drink, and laugh it up. Luke would squat by the door all day. If he got lucky, he'd score some leftovers. If he ran into a soft-hearted stranger, maybe even a couple bucks. One day, just as he was heading toward the diner, a commotion broke out. A sharp yell cut through the air from the front entrance. He froze, then craned his neck to see what was up. A crowd had gathered outside Smiley's. Luke picked up the pace and pushed closer. Turns out, 3 rough-looking guys were laying into some scrawny old man with a gray beard. Looked like a preacher or something. One of the thugs, a loudmouth with a mean streak, was hollering, "Hit him harder." Luke recognized the loudmouth right away. That was Tommy Three Tigers Larson, the only son of a local bigwig, Old Man Larson. Tommy's dad owned half the town, and with that kind of money backing him, the kid spent his days stirring up trouble. Beating on a harmless old preacher? That was just Tuesday for him. But why were they going after this guy so hard? As Luke stood there, trying to piece it together, Tommy reared back and slammed his boot into the old man's chest. The preacher coughed up blood, hitting the dirt hard. Tommy wasn't done though. He lifted his foot for another kick. That's when Luke snapped out of it. No way he was letting this poor guy get stomped to death. He bolted forward, throwing his skinny frame between the preacher and Tommy's crew. "Back off," he shouted, taking a few punches and kicks meant for the old man. After a while, Tommy got bored, spat some curses, and stormed off with his goons. Once they were gone, Luke helped the battered preacher hobble over to a quiet alley nearby. "You okay, sir?" he asked, propping the old man against a wall. The preacher wheezed, catching his breath. "Young man, thank you. I'm so sorry you got dragged into this mess just to save me. I feel awful about it." "Don't worry about it," Luke said with a shrug. "I've got thick skin. Takes more than a few punches to slow me down. But what did you do to tick off Tommy Three Tigers like that?" The old man sighed. "I was just kneeling outside the diner, minding my own business, trying to get a bite to eat. That Tommy kid comes up, demands I read his fortune or some nonsense. I told him I'm a man of faith, not a psychic. I don't mess with that stuff. He wouldn't take no for an answer. I tried to brush him off with a few vague words, but whatever I said must have set him off. Next thing I know, he's swinging." Luke chuckled. "Yeah, sounds like you didn't tell him he'd be rich and famous forever. That's Tommy for you, can't handle anything but flattery." The preacher opened his mouth to reply, but a violent cough cut him off. Blood trickled from his lips, bright red against his pale face. Luke's gut twisted. Crap, that kick must have messed him up bad inside. "Hang on, sir," he said, panic creeping in. "You're hurt worse than I thought. We gotta get you to a doctor. I don't have any cash, but if you trust me, I'll figure something out. What do you say?" As soon as the words left his mouth, Luke kicked himself. A preacher like him probably doesn't carry money either. What am I even asking? The old man was in rough shape. Without help soon, he might not make it. Then, out of nowhere, Luke's hand brushed against the jade pendant hanging around his neck. An idea hit him like a freight train. He yanked it off and held it up. "Wait, I've got this. It's gotta be worth something. Hang tight, I'll pawn it and get you a doctor." The preacher's eyes widened. "Hold on, kid. That's been around your neck this whole time. It's gotta mean something to you. Probably from your folks, right? You can't just sell it off for me." Luke forced a grin. "Nah, it's fine. Truth is, I'm not my parents' real kid. My mom told me that right before she passed. She gave me this pendant, said it'd help me find my birth parents. That's all it's for." "Then you definitely can't get rid of it," the preacher insisted. "Hore you gonna track down your real family without it?" "I already told you," Luke said, brushing it off. "Finding them's a long shot anyway. Saving you matters more right now." He started to stand, but the old man grabbed his arm. "Wait," the preacher said, his voice steady despite the pain. "Can I see that pendant for a sec?" "Sure, why not?" Luke handed it over. The preacher took it, turning it over in his shaky hands, studying every detail. For a long moment, he just stared at it, his face unreadable. Then he handed it back. "Kit,
I appreciate your heart.
I really do. But keep this. I'm not dying yet, few days of rest and I'll be fine. Luke wasn't buying it. He stood up, ready to bolt for a pawn shop anyway, but the preacher kept protesting, stubborn as a mule. Finally, Luke gave in.
Allrecht, fine.
But I'm not leaving you here. He helped the old man up and took him back to his little hideout, a crumbling shed he'd been crashing in. For the next 5 days, Luke looked after him. By the end of it, the preacher was back on his feet, good as new. "Hey kid," he said one morning, "how about we head to a place called Carson's Ridge?"
Come with him, eh?
Luke hesitated.
I dunno, man.
I'm scraping by here at least. Out there?
No clue who I did.
The preacher gave him a sly look.
What? You wanna bake on street corners your whole life?
Stick with me, I might just set you up with something big.
Luke laukhet.
Big talk for a guy who was half dead a week ago.
You're not yanking my chain, are you? I'm a man of God, kid.
I don't mess around with promises. You saved my life, least I can do is return the favor. The preacher's tone was dead serious now. Luke scratched his head, then shrugged.
Allrecht, you win. Il tak along.
Who was this preacher, really? Could he actually deliver on that promise of a better life? What kind of wild ride was Luke about to stumble into? Stick around, you'll find out soon enough. 2 days later, Luke Lang and the old preacher rolled into Carson's Ridge, a dusty little spot not far from Cedar Hollow. After settling the preacher into a rickety old cabin, Luke stepped out to scrounge up some food. Begging was all he knew, so that's what he did. About half an hour later, he found himself standing outside a big fancy house. Think white picket fence, wraparound porch, the whole 9 yards. He knocked on the door and waited, keeping his head down like usual. The door creaked open, and a grumpy-looking housekeeper poked her head out. A beggar? Really? Don't you know what time it is? We haven't even had lunch yet, and you're already here mooching. Get lost. She slammed the door in his face. Luke sighed, turning to leave.
Same old, same old.
But just as he took a step, the door flew open again. The housekeeper, whose name tag read Martha, rushed out, staring at him like she'd seen a ghost.
Young master.
How'd you end up looking like this? She yelled, her voice cracking with shock.
Luke blinked, glancing around.
Nobody else was there. She was definitely talking to him.
Ma'am, who are you calling young master?
Who are you? He asked, totally thrown off. Oh, my poor boy. Martha exclaimed, her face lighting up. It's only been 2 months since you left home. How do you not recognize me?
It's Martha, your old housekeeper. Come inside, quick.
Before Luke could figure out what was happening, Martha grabbed his arm and yanked him into the house, hollering as she went, "Tell the old man he's back."
The young master's home.
Inside the yard, a handful of servants were bustling around. When they heard Martha's shouts, they dropped everything and swarmed Luke. But the second they got a good look at his ragged clothes and dirty face, they froze. "Young master, what happened to you?" one of them stammered. "How'd you end up a beggar?" "Hold off on the questions." Martha snapped. "Get him cleaned up. Take him to the bathroom."
I'll go break the good news to the boss.
Luke tried to protest as they dragged him off.
Hey, wait a sec. You got the wrong guy. I'm not your young master.
But the servants weren't having it. One of them, a wiry guy with teary eyes, shook his head. "I knew those rumors about you getting killed were bunk.
Look at you, still alive.
Whoever did this to you must have scrambled your brains, huh?"
Don't worry, kid. If we find out who hurt you, I'll make em pay.
Revenge? Bad guys? What is this, a cowboy movie? Luke's head was spinning. After a beat, he sized up the situation.
Okay, I'm a beggar anyway. What's the harm in playing along?
Free food, a hot shower, beats starving on the street. So, he shut his mouth and let them take over. They scrubbed him down, head to toe, and tossed his old rags for a crisp new outfit. Weirdly enough, the clothes fit like they'd been tailored just for him, snug in all the right places. After he was cleaned up, they brought him a plate piled high with food. Luke's stomach growled. He didn't think twice before digging in like a man possessed. Right then, A voice boomed from outside the room. He's back? Oh, thank God, I've missed him so much. An old man, skinny weathered with a shock of white hair, burst in and threw his arms around Luke, tears streaming down his face. Luke stood there, stiff as a board, wondering who this guy was. His dad, maybe? Wait, he called me Dean. What's that about? After a long weepy hug, the old man pulled back, still beaming. Dean, my boy, how've you been? He asked, patting Luke's shoulder. Luke hesitated, then decided to roll with it. Mr. Carson, sir, can I call you that?
I'm still Kinderbeat from the road. Mind if you rest up a bit?
He faked a yawn, hoping to dodge any tough questions. The old man nodded, looking concerned. Martha chimed in, sir, when he showed up, he was dressed like a bum. Poor kid's been through hell, probably banged his head pretty good too. Let him settle in, rest up. We'll get a doctor to check him out later. He'll be fine. That seemed to satisfy the old man. All right, take him to his room, he said, waving a hand. The servants hustled Luke off. But as night fell, Luke started worrying about the preacher. Hey, sir, he said to the old man, there's this guy who helped me out, an old preacher. Mind if I bring him here to crash for a bit? Of course, son, the old man said without missing a beat. Go get him. Luke grabbed a couple of servants and led them back to the cabin. But when they got there, the place was empty.
The priacha was gone. No note, no noting.
Disappointed, Luke trudged back to the Carson house with the servants in tow. Who was this old man? Why'd he think Luke was his son? What was going to happen now that Luke was stuck in this mix-up? Keep listening, things are about to get wild. The story's taken a crazy turn already, but believe it or not, Luke hadn't seen anything yet. Back at the house, Martha led him to a bedroom, big, airy, with a faint smell of lavender. There was a double bed with 2 pillows, neatly made up. One look at the setup, and Luke's stomach dropped. Oh no.
This guy's married.
Sweat beaded on his forehead.
What do we do now?
Before he could think up a plan, footsteps echoed outside the door. Luke braced himself, racking his brain for an excuse. The door swung open, and in walked a woman, gorgeous with sharp eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. Honey, she cried, throwing herself at him.
I've been waiting for you forever.
She hugged him tight, fake sobbing into his shoulder. Luke dodged to the side, awkward as hell. She pulled back, frowning.
What's wrong?
Why are you avoiding me? He finally got a good look at her. She was stunning, no doubt. Cheekbones that could cut glass, a flirty vibe in her gaze. But something was off. She'd been crying a second ago, yet her face was dry as a bone. Is she playing me? Sweetheart, he said, scrambling for words. I've been on the road a while.
Hetzal futzi.
Let's just hit the hay, okay? He blew out the bedside lamp, hoping to end the conversation. All right, she said, climbing into bed. But Luke didn't follow. He grabbed a blanket and flopped onto the floor instead. Honey, what are you doing? She asked, her voice dripping with that same flirty edge. Why sleep on the floor when there's a perfectly good bed? I got used to roughing it out there, he mumbled. Floor feels more comfortable now. Don't worry about me, just get some rest. He faked a loud snore, praying she'd buy it. She didn't push it, just sighed and settled in. But Luke's mind was racing. That preacher said he'd set me up with something big. Is this it?
Was ist old man? Was hayes real son?
Why do they think I'm him? And this woman, why is she faking tears? He tossed and turned in his head all night. Should he sneak out at dawn? Or stick around and see where this crazy ride took him? The old man clearly adored his son. Leaving now might break his heart. Plus, free food and a warm bed beat begging any day. Screw it, he thought. I'll stay a few days, figure this out. But tomorrow, I've got to dig into what's really going on here. Eventually, exhaustion won out. Luke drifted off, dreaming of his adoptive parents smiling at him, something they'd never done in real life. Was it a sign? He'd find out soon enough. Luke woke up early the next morning, rolling off the floor and shaking off the stiffness. No point wasting time, he needed answers. After some smooth talking with the servants over breakfast, he pieced together the basics about this place. The old man was Henry Carson, the big shot around here. Back in his teens, He'd washed up in Carson's Ridge with nothing but the clothes on his back. Smart as a whip, though, he built himself an empire from scratch. These days, the Carson family was the wealthiest for miles around, a real rags-to-riches story. Henry had one son, Dean Carson, his pride and joy. 3 months ago, Dean married a girl named Jenny Tatum, a pretty little thing he'd rescued off the side of the road one day. Funny thing was, Henry hadn't been thrilled about the match. Jenny's past was a blank slate, and that made the old man twitchy. But Dean wouldn't budge, threatened to run off or worse if Henry didn't give his blessing. So, Henry caved, and the wedding went ahead. From what the servants said, Dean and Jenny were head over heels after tying the knot. Henry finally relaxed, thinking maybe he'd misjudged her. Then, a little over 2 months back, Dean headed out of town on some business, said he'd be gone a month tops. But a month came and went, and no word. Henry started freaking out. He sent some guys to track Dean down. Word came back that Dean had left his last stop days ago, a 4 or 5 day trip home, nothing crazy. So why hadn't he shown up? Henry dispatched more men to scour the route. In some busted-up old barn along the way, they found Dean's jacket and an empty wallet. Everyone figured he'd been jumped by bandits and left for dead. Luke nodded along as the servants filled him in. So that's it, they think I'm Dean. Now it all made sense. The hugs, the tears, the whole welcome home routine. With the puzzle coming together, Luke weighed his options. Henry only had Dean, no other kids. If Luke spilled the beans now, told the old man his real son was probably gone for good, it'd crush him. After some back and forth in his head, Luke decided to stick around for a bit. He'd play the part, keep Henry happy, and break the truth later when the time was right. So he stayed. But Jenny? She was a wild card. Luke didn't trust her, not with those crocodile tears from last night. To keep her from sniffing out he wasn't Dean, he made a habit of coming back to the bedroom late, crashing on the floor every time. Jenny tried talking him into bed a couple times, all sweet and pouty, but Luke brushed her off with excuses, still getting used to soft mattresses, that kind of thing. She'd huff and let it go, but he could tell she was watching him close. 10 days flew by like that. One afternoon, with nothing better to do, Luke wandered out of the house, just stretching his legs. Before he knew it, he was back at that run-down cabin where he'd left the preacher. As he got close, a familiar voice drifted out from inside. "You've got to figure something out," it said, low and tense. "He can't keep sleeping on the floor forever. My belly's getting bigger every day. I'm pretty sure he's onto us." Luke stopped dead in his tracks. That was Jenny's voice. What the hell's she doing here? And who's she talking to? His pulse kicked up a notch. A man's voice answered, rough and edgy. "That little punk Dean was supposed to be dead. I paid good money to make sure of it. How's he back? You positive it's him?" "Positive." Jenny snapped. "Don't be stupid. I'd know my own husband anywhere. But something's off, he won't even touch me. We can't let this drag on." Luke's jaw dropped. Dean's dead? They killed him? His mind raced, connecting the dots. Jenny and this guy, whoever he was, had set Dean up, taken him out. And now they thought Luke was Dean, back from the grave. The man growled, "Well, if he's onto you, we're screwed. What's the plan?" Jenny didn't hesitate. "If we can't shake him, we finish him. Quick and clean. No loose ends this time." Luke's blood ran cold. "Finish me?" He strained to hear more, but their voices dropped to a whisper. Not wanting to get caught, he backed off quiet as a mouse, ducking behind a tree to watch from a distance. Sure enough, Jenny stepped out of the cabin a minute later, the mystery guy right behind her. Luke didn't recognize him, just some shady-looking dude with a scar across his cheek. As they disappeared down the road, Luke's brain went into overdrive. "This isn't even my fight," he thought. "I just stumbled into some rich kid's life, and now they want to kill me for it?" His first instinct was to bolt, grab his stuff and vanish before sunrise. But then Henry's face flashed in his mind, all warm and trusting. "He thinks I'm his son. If I ditch him now, he'll be heartbroken. And Dean, sounds like he died for nothing. These two'll get away with it, maybe even come after Henry next." Luke clenched his fists. "No way. I'm not running. I'm gonna find out the truth." With that, he turned and hightailed it back to the Carson house. When he got there, He played it cool, acted like nothing was up. Jenny wasn't back yet, so he had time to think. What's her next move? How's she planning to take me out? He'd have to keep his eyes peeled.
Dus rollet in fast.
By the time Luke stepped into the bedroom, Jenny was already there, waiting. She gave him a weird look and asked, "Hey hon, level with me. Are you still the same guy I married?" Her question hit like a sucker punch. Does she know I'm not Dean? Luke's heart skipped, but he forced a laugh. Babe, what's gotten into you? Why'd you even ask that? She crossed her arms, eyes narrowing. It's been over 10 days since you got back. You don't touch me, you sleep on the floor. What's the deal? You're different. Different, he said, keeping his tone light. I told you, I got used to roughing it out there. Give me a few more days, I'll be back to normal. Promise. He flopped onto the floor, closed his eyes, and prayed she'd drop it. She didn't say anything else, just climbed into bed. But Luke wasn't sleeping, not tonight. What's Jenny cooking up with that guy? How are they gonna try me? He stayed on edge, ears open, waiting for her to make a move. About an hour later, he heard it, a faint rustle. He cracked an eye and saw Jenny slipping out of bed, tiptoeing toward him with something in her hand. His throat tightened as she got closer. Then she pulled out a small ceramic jar and popped the lid. Out crawled a centipede, 2 inches long, ugly as sin. Luke nearly jolted upright but held still, watching in horror as it scuttled onto his hand. The thing reared up, fangs glinting, then out of nowhere, it flipped over, wriggling like it was drunk. A second later, it bolted for the door and vanished. What the hell? Luke's mind blanked. Jenny looked just as stunned, staring at the empty jar. With a quiet huff, she slunk back to bed. Luke let out a silent breath. Danger dodged, for now. But he wasn't taking chances. He kept one eye half open till morning, wondering, was that thing poisonous? Why'd it run off? It wasn't till later that he figured it out. Tucked in his pocket was a beat-up little pouch his mom had sewn for him years ago. Back home, where venomous bugs were everywhere, she'd stuffed it with ground-up bitterroot, a natural repellent. He'd carried it all this time, never thinking much of it. Turns out, that pouch had just saved his skin. After that close call with the centipede, Luke knew he couldn't keep this game going. Jenny was out for blood, and he wasn't about to stick around waiting for her next trick. By morning, he'd made up his mind. He had to come clean to Henry Carson. Later that day, he found Henry in the study, flipping through some old ledgers. "Dean, my boy," the old man said, looking up with a grin. "You're looking better every day. How's the head?" Luke took a deep breath. "Mr. Carson, listen, I need you to hear me out. Call you that, okay?" Henry's smile faltered. "Dean, what's wrong? Why are you calling me Mr. Carson? I'm your dad." "Don't get upset, sir," Luke said, holding up a hand. "Just let me explain slow. Truth is, I'm not your son, Dean. My name's Luke Lang. I'm from a little nowhere town called Linden. Plague hit us hard, took my folks, and I ended up on the road, begging to get by. Halfway here, I ran into this old preacher who brought me to Carson's Ridge. I showed up at your door looking for a handout, and well, you all thought I was someone else." Henry's jaw dropped. "What? No way.
You raise a spitting image of my Dean.
This some kind of joke." "I wish it was," Luke said, shaking his head. "I only found out recently myself. I'm not even my parents' real kid. My mom told me on her deathbed. Said I was handed off to her with this." He pulled out the jade pendant and held it up. "Told me to use it to find my birth folks." Henry snatched the pendant, turning it over in his hands. He studied it hard, squinting like he was trying to unlock some ancient secret. Then, out of nowhere, he yanked Luke into a bear hug, bawling like a baby.
"Son. Jure mine, my real boy."
Luke's brain short-circuited.
"Wait, what? Jure my dad?
How's that even possible?" Through sobs, Henry spilled the whole story. Back in the day, he'd been married twice. His first wife, Clara, couldn't have kids, and she'd pitched a fit whenever he brought up taking another wife. So, Henry kept it hush-hush and married a woman named Maggie on the side. A year later, Maggie gave him twin boys, Dean and Luke. Not long after, Maggie got sick and passed away. Henry was all set to bring the boys home to raise them proper, but then disaster struck. A gang of outlaws hit their camp, looting everything. In the chaos, Dean got left behind, but Luke vanished, no trace. Henry figured he was gone for good. Luke's eyes widened as it sank in. So that's why I ended up with strangers. And this pendant, it's proof. Henry nodded, wiping his face. I never stopped wondering about you.
And now here you are.
They hugged it out, tears and all. But Luke wasn't done, there was bigger fish to fry. Hold up, Dad, he said, pulling back. There's something else. Yesterday, I overheard Jenny talking to some guy in that old cabin. They killed Dean, set him up and got rid of him. Now they're after me, 'cause they think I'm him. Henry's face went white. What?
My Dean's dead?
Murdered. Yeah, Luke said grimly. And get this, I asked if Dean had any health problems. You know, anything that might have stood out. Henry frowned. Health problems? Only thing was, Dean couldn't, well, he couldn't have kids. Doctors said it was permanent. Exactly, Luke said, leaning in. So if Dean couldn't have kids, whose baby is Jenny carrying? She's showing Dad big time.
Henry froze, the piece clicking into place.
That's why they want you gone. She's covering something up. What do we do? Luke asked. We can't just call her out, she'll deny it flat.
Like Tesai, you gotta catch a thief red-handed.
Henry's jaw tightened.
You're right.
She tried killing you last night, didn't she? With that bug. Luke nodded. Didn't work, but yeah. I bet she'll meet that guy again soon, plan their next move.
Vital here, catch 'em in the act.
Agreed, Henry said, fire in his eyes.
Let's set it up.
They huddled up, whispering a plan. That afternoon, Jenny slipped out of the house, claiming she was visiting a friend. Luke and Henry waited a beat, then followed, keeping their distance. Sure enough, she headed straight for the cabin. The scar-faced guy was already there, pacing. Luke and Henry crept up, pressing their ears to the wall. The centipede flopped, Jenny was saying, annoyed. I don't know what went wrong, should have dropped him dead.
Scarface cursed. We can't mess this up again.
That old man's got cash. Once Dean is out, we pin it on bandits, take the loot and split. Luke shot Henry a look, told you, and they listened as the two hashed out a new scheme. When the timing felt right, they busted in, catching Jenny and Scarface off guard.
Hands up. Henry roaret, leveling a shotgun hit grabbait from the house. The pair froze, busted.
Henry's men showed up minutes later, and they hauled Jenny and her accomplice off to the sheriff. Under questioning, the whole ugly truth came out. Jenny and Scarface, real name Eddie Malone, were a couple, grifters who'd been running scams for years. They'd rolled into Carson's Ridge, sniffed out Henry's wealth, and cooked up a plan. Jenny played the damsel in distress to hook Dean, figuring she'd bleed the family dry over time. But Dean's infertility threw a wrench in it. When Jenny got pregnant, by Eddie obviously, they panicked. Couldn't risk Dean figuring it out, so they lured him out on that business trip, knocked him out, and dumped him off a cliff. Stripped his clothes and wallet to fake a robbery. With Dean gone, they thought they'd won, until Luke showed up. Luke's floor-sleeping and hands-off routine tipped Jenny off that something was wrong. She and Eddie figured Dean had caught wise, so they tried to take him out too. Good thing that Bitterroot Pouch had other plans. The sheriff locked them up tight. Jenny and Eddie got what was coming, life behind bars. Luke, meanwhile, settled into the Carson house for good. 2 weeks later, the old preacher popped back up, strolling in with a surprise guest. The whole family gaped. Standing there, alive and breathing, was Dean Carson. Henry Carson and Luke Lang couldn't believe their eyes when Dean walked through the door, the old preacher trailing behind him. The room went dead silent until Henry finally croaked out, "Dean? How?" The preacher cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Let me explain." And boy, did he have a story. Turns out, he wasn't just some random holy man. He'd been one of the outlaws who'd raided Henry's camp all those years ago. The brains behind that job? Henry's first wife, Clara. She'd found out about his secret family with Maggie and, green with jealousy, hired the gang to wipe them out under the guise of a robbery. But when the preacher, back then just a young thug named Jack, saw those twin babies. Something in him cracked. He couldn't go through with it. He left Dean behind for Henry to find and took Luke with him. Halfway down the road, he ran into a poor couple begging for scraps. Feeling a pang of guilt, he handed Luke over to them, pendant and all, then hightailed it out of there. Years later, Jack turned his life around, became a preacher, and swore off his old ways. When he bumped into Luke begging in Cedar Hollow and spotted that jade pendant, it hit him like a ton of bricks. Luke was the kid he'd spared. After hearing Luke's story, he knew he had to bring him back to Carson's Ridge. That's what he meant by setting him up with something big, a family, a home. Once Luke was safe with Henry, the preacher took off again. Just yesterday, he'd found Dean passed out by the roadside, half dead from thirst and exhaustion. Turns out, Eddie and Jenny hadn't finished him off. Dean survived that cliff fall, thanks to a good Samaritan who patched him up. He'd been staggering home when he collapsed, right in time for the preacher to scoop him up and bring him back. Henry listened, jaw slack, then turned to the preacher. "You took my boy, but you saved him too. And now you've brought both my sons home.
I auktas Luke you, or thank you.
Guess I'll go with the second one."
The priacha shrugged. "I vidone my penance. You folks take care."
Dean's reunion with the family was a tear-jerker, lots of hugs, lots of catching up. Turns out that infertility issue? Doctors fixed it up after his brush with death. Before long, both Dean and Luke settled down, got married, and started families of their own.
The Carson clan grew big and loot, living the good life in Carson's Ridge.
And that, folks, wraps up our first tale. Thanks for sticking with me. I'm Nancy, and this is Nancy's Tales. Hope you enjoyed it. Now, let's dive into story number 2. Trust me, if the first one hooked you, this next one's gonna reel you in deep. It's called The Folk Tale of the Man Who Tore Down His House to Save a Fox, and got his hand nipped by its kit at midnight. Ready? Here we go. It was late afternoon in the sleepy town of Pine Creek, nestled in the Ozarks. Charlie Lind had just sold his last bundle of firewood at the market and was packing up to head home. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the stalls, when someone blocked his path. It was Silas Tanner, the smug owner of Tanner's Pharmacy, the only drugstore in town. Dressed in a slick suit, flanked by 2 burly lackeys, Silas smirked down at Charlie. Well, if it isn't Charlie Lind, the ex-druggist turned lumberjack.
"What's next? Chopping trays for pennies."
Charlie bristled, but kept his cool. "Better than peddling poison for profit, Silas." The lackeys snickered, but Silas's grin vanished.
"I let you off easy when I run you out of business."
"Keep running your mouth, and I'll make sure you can't even swing an axe around here." Charlie didn't bite. He'd had enough of Silas's games, so he turned and walked off. The bad blood between them went way back. Pine Creek used to have 2 pharmacies, Charlie's on the east side, Silas's on the west. Charlie came from a long line of healers. Even after his family hit hard times, he poured his heart into medicine, always putting patients first. Silas? He knew enough to get by, but he cared more about cash than cures. His shelves were stocked with cheap, faulty drugs, sometimes outright fakes, bought low and sold high. Folks caught on quick. They'd trek across town to Charlie's place rather than risk Silas's junk. That lit a fire under Silas, and he fought dirty. He paid off some local punks to harass Charlie's shop, smashing windows, scaring customers. Then he framed Charlie for a botched treatment that supposedly killed a patient. Silas greased the right palms, faked some evidence, and got the county to shut Charlie down. Banned him from practicing medicine, too. Now Silas had Pine Creek's drug trade all to himself, and he turned it rotten, jacking up prices, strong-arming vendors for protection fees. He was a petty tyrant, and nobody dared cross him. Charlie trudged home, mood sour after Silas's taunts. To top it off, the sky cracked open, dumping rain. With no umbrella, he ducked into an abandoned graveyard just outside town, a creepy, overgrown spot where folks used to bury the unclaimed dead. Nobody came around anymore. It was too spooky. Perfect hideout for critters, though. Charlie found a dry patch under a sagging oak and sat down to wait out the storm. Before he could relax, he spotted something in the weeds, a furry lump. It was a fox, round little eyes locked on him, breathing funny. Her belly was swollen, she was about to pop. He started to scoot away, but then she let out a weak whimper. Charlie's healer instincts kicked in. He edged closer and saw blood. She was struggling to give birth. No tools, no kit, but Charlie wasn't fazed. He delivered tougher cases with less. Kneeling beside her, he rubbed her belly gentle-like, easing her through it. Bit by bit, she perked up, and soon enough, 2 tiny fox kits slid out, squeaking and wriggling. Charlie checked them over. "All right, Mama," he said, "your babies are fine. That's all I can do for you. Here's what's left of my lunch, take it." He pulled 2 stale cornbread chunks from his bag, set them by her side, and left her to rest. A few days passed, and Charlie Lind went back to his routine, hauling firewood to Pine Creek's market to scrape by. To steer clear of Silas Tanner, he stuck to the east end of town, far from that snake's pharmacy. He'd sell his load, pocket a few bucks, and head home. One day, trudging back after a sale, he cut through an alley behind a big, stately house. 2 servants were out back, sweeping the yard and chatting. "Heard the old lady's on her last legs," one said, shaking his head. "Saw her yesterday, looked like death warmed over." "No kidding," the other replied. "They've been stuffing her with every tonic Silas Tanner's got. Fat lot of good it's doing, she's worse than ever. Bet she won't make it through the week." Charlie's ears perked up. Sure, the county had banned him from practicing medicine, but he couldn't shake that healer's itch. Lives mattered more than laws. From what those 2 were saying, he had a hunch about what was wrong, and how to fix it. He was about to step up and offer help when a shout rang out from inside. "She's fading fast, get a doctor." The servants dropped their brooms and bolted into the house. Charlie didn't think twice, he followed them in. The place was chaos. People crowded around a bedroom where an old woman lay propped up on pillows, her face pale as chalk, breaths coming short and sharp. A guy who looked like the butler was barking orders. "Somebody call a doctor. The young master's due back this afternoon. He's got to see her before she goes." Charlie pushed through. "Move aside, let me take a look." Folks shot him weird glances. Who was this stranger? But nobody stopped him. Too desperate to care. He knelt by the bed, propping the old lady up. He patted her back firm but gentle, then pressed on her stomach a few times. After a couple rounds, she let out a big belch, loud enough to turn heads. Miraculous thing was, her breathing steadied right after. Color crept back into her cheeks, and her eyes cleared up. The room erupted in cheers. "What did you do, mister?" the butler asked, slack-jawed. Charlie shrugged. She wasn't dying, just ate too much greasy food. Her stomach couldn't handle it, and all those fancy tonics from Tanner's made it worse. "Cut back on the rich stuff, mix in some tea with ginger or peppermint, and she'll be fine." "That no-good Silas Tanner," the butler spat. "Told us she was frail and needed his pricey junk. Nearly killed her. Wait till the young master hears, he'll tan Tanner's hide." The old lady, now sitting up, waved Charlie over. "You're staying for dinner, young man. My son's coming home soon, he'll want to thank you proper." Charlie tried to duck out, but she wouldn't hear it. Over supper, the butler filled him in. The house belonged to the Harper family. Widow Harper had raised her boy, Jake, all on her own after her husband passed. Tough years, but Jake turned out sharp, aced his exams last year and got tapped as the new county judge. He'd bought this place for his mom, hired help to look after her, and was due back today after some out-of-town business. Widow Harper had always pinched pennies growing up. Now that Jake could provide, he'd told the staff to spoil her with big meals, steaks, pies, the works. She wasn't used to it, and her stomach rebelled. Silas Tanner swooped in, peddling expensive cures that only made her sicker, probably on purpose, knowing him. Greedy bastard saw a cash cow and milked it. That night, Judge Jake Harper rolled in, and the house lit up with excitement. The servants spilled the whole story, how Charlie saved his mom. Jake's face went dark. "Tanner's been fleecing folks too long. I'm digging into this, mark my words, he's done." Charlie figured that was judge business, not his circus. But a couple weeks later, Pine Creek buzzed with news. First, Tanner's pharmacy got shut down, sheriff's orders. They nailed Silas for fraud and selling fake drugs. Word was he'd skipped town, tail between his legs. Second, the county lifted Charlie's ban. Judge Jake handed him the keys to Tanner's old shop, told him to take it over and get back to healing folks. Charlie dove in, sorting through Silas's mess, tossing out bad stock, restocking with legit medicine. He saw patients all day, every day, working late into the night. One evening, after sending off his last customer, he slumped over the counter, bone-tired. Figured he'd rest his eyes for a minute. Next thing he knew, he was out cold. A sharp sting on his hand jolted him awake. He yanked it back, heart pounding, and saw something furry dart to the corner of the room. It was a fox, same size as the one from the graveyard, but this one's belly hung loose, like she just had kits. She didn't run, just stared at him with those round little eyes. Charlie checked his hand, red, but no blood. She didn't mean to hurt me, he thought. Then it clicked. Wait a sec, you're that mama fox, aren't you? One of your kits in trouble. The fox perked up, like she understood, then hopped off the counter and trotted to the door. She kept glancing back, waiting. Charlie grinned, smart critter. He grabbed his medical bag and followed her out into the night. Sure enough, she led him straight to that old graveyard. Not far off, two shadowy figures were skulking toward a shack nearby, acting sneaky. The fox stopped short, crouching in the grass with two tiny kits beside her. She pawed at Charlie, like she was pointing him toward the shack. He crept closer, peeking through a cracked window. Inside, a familiar voice hissed, "Lynn's asleep at the shop tonight. Perfect chance. We torch it, take him out, and split the cash you stashed." Charlie's blood froze. It was Silas Tanner, back for revenge. The other guy grumbled, "You sure that hidden stash is still there? Better not stiff us." "Relax," Silas sneered. "Lynn's too dumb to find it. We burn him out, grab the loot, and start over somewhere else." Charlie's mind raced as they plotted. Silas was gonna arson his shop and kill him in the process. He glanced at the fox, who gave him a knowing look. "She brought me here to warn me." Later that night, back in Pine Creek, Silas and his cronies crept up to the pharmacy, piling straw and splashing kerosene. Just as they struck a match, lanterns flared up all around, sheriff's deputies, closing in tight. Silas's face went blank as they cuffed him, muttering, "How'd they know?" Charlie stepped out from the shadows. "Evil gets what's coming, Silas. That's all you need to know." The fox and her kits had tipped him off just in time. He'd raced back and alerted the law. Silas got hauled off for good, and Charlie kept that pharmacy running, helping folks like he was born to. And that's the end of Tale 2, folks. Hope you liked it. If you did, drop a comment below, hit that subscribe button, and share it around. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time on Nancy's Tales. Winter rolled into Pine Creek a few years after Charlie Lynn's fox luck became town legend. Snow blanketed the Ozarks, turning the hills into a postcard scene, but it wasn't all cozy fires and hot cider. Word around town was that Silas Tanner had busted out of the state pen, slipped past the guards during a blizzard and vanished into the wild. Folks figured he'd freeze out there, but Charlie had a bad feeling. Silas wasn't the type to let a grudge die easy.
One night, Charlie was closing up the pharmacy, the wind rattling the windows so mating fierce.
He just locked the door when he heard a scratch outside, sharp, like nails on wood. Peeking through the glass, he saw her again, Mama Fox, snow dusting her fur, those keen eyes locked on him. No kits this time, she was alone.
"Back again, who?" Charlie saw it, cracking the door. "What's up, girl?"
She didn't budge, just stared, then turned and trotted a few steps down the street before looking back.
"She wants him to follow."
Charlie grabbed his coat and lantern, curiosity outweighing the chill. Mama Fox led him out of town, her tracks barely denting the snow. They wound through the woods, past the old graveyard, and up a ridge Charlie hadn't climbed in years. The air bit at his face, but he kept going till she stopped at a rocky overhang. There, tucked in the shadows, was a makeshift camp, tarp strung up, embers smoldering in a fire pit. And sitting by it, hunched and scowling, was Silas Tanner.
Charlie ducked low, heart pounding.
Silas looked rough, beard scraggly, clothes torn, but he was alive, and he wasn't alone. Two other guys, hard-looking types with rifles, muttered beside him.
"Tomorrow night," Silas growled, poking the fire. "We hit Lynn's place. Burn it to the ground. Take whatever's left."
He thinks he's untouchable with that fox nonsense. "I'll show him." One of the goons chuckled. You sure about this, Tanner? Sheriff's still sniffing around. He won't catch us, Silas snapped. Storm's our cover. By the time they dig out, we'll be long gone with his cash, and his scalp, if I'm feeling generous.
Charlies Stomach twisted.
He's coming for me again. He glanced at Mama Fox, who gave him a steady look, like she'd done her part. Quiet as he could, he slipped back down the ridge, the fox shadowing him all the way to town. By dawn, Charlie had the sheriff and a posse rounded up. He told them everything, Silas's camp, the plan, the works. Might sound crazy, he said, but a fox tipped me off.
Zavet mai hidet Twissenau.
Sheriff Dawson didn't bat an eye. Pine Creek folks were used to Charlie's fox stories by now. If you say so, Lind. Let's move. They hit the ridge at dusk, catching Silas and his crew off guard. The storm had picked up, snow swirling thick, but the posse moved fast. Silas barely got a shot off before they had him pinned, cuffs on, rifles confiscated. How'd you know? He snarled as they dragged him down the hill. Charlie just smiled. Guess some debts don't quit, Silas.
Naturesgott a long memory.
Back in town, Silas got shipped off to a tougher lockup, no escaping this time. Charlie's pharmacy stood strong, and folks started leaving little offerings by his door, apples, biscuits, even a carved fox figurine, thanking whatever magic kept him safe. Next full moon, Charlie spotted Mama Fox again, perched on a fence post near his cabin. She didn't come close, just watched him for a spell, then melted into the night. He never saw her after that, but every now and then, he'd find a pebble or a twig by his doorstep, small signs she was still out there, keeping an eye on things. That's the thing about kindness, Charlie'd tell folks over a beer at the saloon. You toss it out there, and it comes back, sometimes with teeth, sometimes with luck. Me? I'll take both. And that's one more for the books, folks.
Hope you're loving These Pine Creek, tales as much as I Donnerstag stick with me on Nancy's tales. Next on is gonna be a dozi.
Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll catch you soon. Spring came slow to Pine Creek that next year, the Ozarks thawing out with muddy trails and blooming dogwoods. Charlie Lynn's pharmacy was busier than ever, folks swore by his cures now, and the fox lucktails had spread beyond town lines. Travelers passing through would stop by just to hear him spin the yarn about Mama Fox over a cup of coffee.
Life was good, Stidi. Until the Whispers started.
It began with a kid, little Tommy Grayson, running into the shop one afternoon, wide-eyed and panting. Mr. Lind.
Ihr savet, out by the old mill. A fox, big as a wolf, black as night.
Snuck right up on me while I was fishing, then poof gone.
Charlie chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair.
Probably just a shadow, Tommy. Foxes don't get that big. Maybe Mama Fox is messing with you, she's got a knack for that. But Tommy wasn't the only one. Over the next week, more folks came in with stories. A dark fox, bigger than normal, lurking around the edges of Pine Creek. Old Widow Jenkins swore it stared through her window at midnight. A logger claimed it spooked his horse so bad the cart flipped. Nobody got hurt, but the sightings had folks jittery. Charlie brushed it off at first. Tall tales grow legs in small towns. But then one evening, as he was sweeping up the pharmacy, he caught a flicker outside. He stepped onto the porch, squinting into the dusk. There by the tree-lean stood a fox, jet black, taller than any he'd seen, eyes glinting like coals. It didn't move, just watched him.
Well, il be damned, Charlie muttered. You knew.
He reached into his pocket, feeling that old Cherokee stone Mama Fox had given him years back. The black fox tilted its head, then turned and slipped into the woods. That night, Charlie dreamed of Mama Fox. She sat in the graveyard, her kits playing around her, but her eyes were sad. Behind her loomed that black fox, silent and still. When he woke, a cold sweat clung to him. Something's coming, he thought. Next morning, a stranger rolled into town, a slick type named Victor Crow, all sharp suit and sharper grin. Said he was a land buyer from St. Louis, looking to snap up Pine Creek's outskirts for a logging outfit. He waved cash around the saloon, charming folks into signing over their plots. Most didn't bite, Pine Creekers were stubborn, but a few hard up for money took the deal. Charlie didn't trust Crow one bit. The guy's eyes were too hungry, his handshake too quick. When Crow swung by the pharmacy with an offer for Charlie's cabin land, Charlie flat out refused. Not selling, he said.
This town's got roots deeper in your pockets.
Crow's smile didn't waver.
So it yourself, Lind. Progress don't wait for sentiment.
But as he left, Charlie caught a whiff of something sour, like trouble brewing. That night, the black fox showed up again, right outside his cabin. It paced the yard, then stopped and stared toward the old mill. Charlie grabbed his lantern and followed, half curious, half dreading what he'd find. At the mill, he spotted Crow and a couple roughnecks, huddled over a map by lamplight. "We'll flood it," Crow was saying, tapping the paper. "Dam the creek, wash out the holdouts," Lind included. "Call it an accident. Sheriff'll buy it with the right bribe."
Charlie scoot sank. Tere gonna drownu es out.
He slipped back home, the black fox trailing him like a shadow. By sunrise, he'd rallied the town, told them Crow's plan, the fox's warning, everything. Folks armed up with pitchforks and hunting rifles, ready to defend their homes. Sheriff Dawson led the charge to the mill, catching Crow mid-scheme. The slick talker tried to bolt, but that black fox darted out, tripping him up long enough for the posse to nab him. Papers in his satchel spelled it all out: dates, payoffs, the works. Crow and his crew got hauled off to face a judge, and Pine Creek stayed dry. After, folks asked Charlie about that black fox. "Dunno," he'd say, scratching his chin. "Maybe Mama Fox sent a friend, or maybe she's still out there, bigger and badder than ever. Either way, I owe her another one." The sightings stopped after that, but Charlie kept an eye on the woods. Every spring, he'd leave a little cornbread by the graveyard, just in case.
"Looks a funny thing," he tells the saloon crowd.
"Sometimes it's a pebble, sometimes it's a shadow. Me, I'll take it however it comes." That's another Pine Creek tale in the bag, folks. Hope it gave you chills and thrills.
Keep it locked on Nancy's Tales. More weird and wild stories coming your way.
Drop a line, hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Summer blazed into Pine Creek the following year, the Ozarks humming with cicadas and thick with humidity. Charlie Lind's pharmacy had become a cornerstone of the town. Folks didn't just come for medicine now, they came for his stories.